McCrispy strips are now at McDonald's. Tender, juicy, and its own sauce. Would you look at that? Well, you can't see it, but trust me, it looks delicious. New McCrispy strips, now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Get this, adults with financial literacy skills have 82% more wealth than those who don't. From swimming lessons to piano classes, us parents invest in so many things to enrich our kids' lives. But are we investing in their future financial success? With Greenlight, you can teach your kids financial literacy skills like earning, saving, and investing. And this investment costs less than that after-school treat. Start prioritizing their financial education and future today with a risk-free trial at greenlight.com/Wondery. Greenlight.com/Wondery.
Bombas makes the most comfortable socks, underwear, and T-shirts.
Warning, Bombas are so absurdly comfortable you may throw out all your other clothes.
Sorry, do we legally have to say that?
No, this is just how I talk, and I really love my Bombas.
They do feel that good. And they do good, too. One item purchased equals one item donated.
To feel good and do good, go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
I say, because if I do die, I'm gonna ask the Lord, let me haunt you.
We so often hear about those that don't make it out of danger alive. But what about those that do?
My body got warm and it just said, get up. You're not done, get up.
I'm Caitlin Van Mall, back with a brand new season of I Survived.
The more I begged him, the happier and the more excited he got.
Join me for new episodes of I Survived every Monday, and subscribe now wherever you listen to podcasts.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we continue our look at the Murdaugh trial. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my luminescent co-host, Elise.
Brett, I was all ready to respond to the luminescent part, and you had to mispronounce my name because,
is it mispronouncing or is it just an alternative? Exactly, it could just be an alternative pronunciation.
This trial, this Alec Murdaugh trial has made me question pronunciation of everything in the English language.
And I love how people are writing emails saying, oh, it's pronounced this way. It's like, okay.
There's no
sure
way anybody knows how it's pronounced, including the man himself.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. But,
that was really good. It's been a while since you've caught me totally off guard.
Well, there you go. I'm glad I could accomplish that. By the way, that descriptor was provided by Janie, who I guess believes you shine a light on all sorts of dark places.
Oh, thank you, Jamie. That was I was excited about the descriptor, and then you had to go and mispronounce my name.
Well, or maybe it's just a better pronunciation.
Okay.
Alice.
Well, it might be. So let's let folks in on this because we have been, let's be honest. I think if we took our time on this particular case, this could be a JonBenet length case. This could be a 9 or 10 episode case for sure. But we are racing against the clock because the prosecution rested just yesterday. There's still more of the trial to go while we're recording this. You guys will probably be hearing this afterwards. But we are trying to record this because I am racing against the clock, about to have a baby, and we really want to finish this case before that happens. I don't know if we're going to do it.
I really think we're probably going to have a baby in the middle of this case,
We
but
may.
that's okay. That's okay, because we're going to get a little bit ahead. It's going to be fine.
But look at how good we are. So you guys know, we're recording during nap time right now. We're recording after bedtime. We are recording all the time because Brett doesn't give maternity leave.
It's true. It's true. It's more like Alice is cracking a whip on me. I was about ready to take a nap myself, and all of a sudden she's like, let's record. So here we are.
That's
fair. You never know. You know, these babies, they can come at any time.
Yeah, for anyone who's hearing it for the first time, by the time you hear this, there will probably already be a baby here. But yes, there's going to be a new prosecutee. We'll update you when that happens. But in the meantime, we're working hard because what we really care about, I know you guys don't really care about a birth announcement. You care about Alec Murdaugh.
That's right. You do. And as you guys who've been listening know, we're right in the middle of the timeline in this case. And this is truly a case where the timeline may matter more than just about any case you're going to see. So much of the prosecution's case has been dependent on the timeline. If you're watching the trial, where we are right now as we record this, the prosecution just finished up their presentation, and the very last witness they did was a timeline witness, because the timeline really tells a lot of the story, and we're in the middle of that. We've been telling you the story as sort of the evidence is laid out, but now we're getting into what happened right around the murders and what Alec Murdaugh's alibi is. And interestingly, the defense, as part of South Carolina procedural law, had to file an alibi filing before the trial even began, that sort of laid out in a very short, generalized form, his description of his what he was doing that day. So we wanted to provide that as well, so you can compare that to the evidence and see sort of how it lines up.
And this goes in line with what we've told you all about trials. There are no surprises allowed at trials, not just for the prosecution. We've talked about Brady turning over all the evidence, none of these sort of Perry Mason moments, because the element of surprise is not supposed to have any role in the courtroom. Of course, the jurors are hearing it for the first time, but each side has to know what the other is arguing. And this also applies for the defense. That's why they have to let the prosecution know what they intend to argue as their defense in this alibi filing. And just so you know, the whole point of this is we're not trying to go for a TV moment or like an aha moment. That's actually the last thing you want in trial. What you want is for each side to know exactly what the play is going to be for the other side and thoroughly be able to research and cross-examine. That's kind of at the heart of the trial system, the cross-examination, to be able to test the other side's evidence. And so, it's almost contrary to this day and age of, the gotcha moment and the TikTok videos that in, 20 seconds, you're able to just shock the other side. That's not supposed to happen. So this is what the defense put in their alibi filing. So this is Alec's defense. He said a few minutes after 9 p.m., Murdaugh left to visit his mom in Alameda, and he did so because she's suffering from late-stage Alzheimer's. It was a drive of about 20 minutes, and during that drive, Murdaugh called his son Buster, his brother John, his sister-in-law Liz, Chris Wilson, and C.B. Rowe. Keep C.B. Rowe in mind because in particular, he's going to become important later. In other words, on this drive, he's calling a lot of people. But kind of weirdly, Alec deletes some of these calls from his call record. Not all of them, but some of them. And remember what we've told you about Cellbrite and cell phone analysis. 99.9% of what you think is deleted on there can be recovered by forensic analysis. And this was recovered.
So the defense has not yet started its presentation. Well, they have. They put on a couple of witnesses at the end of the day on Friday that really didn't matter. I mean, they were really just filling some time till they could get to next week when they're really going to start their witnesses. They're going to have some experts. I expect some of those will be cell phone experts. And I think one of the things they're going to attack is this notion that Alec deleted these calls because it doesn't actually make sense. Like, he deletes some of them, I guess, might make sense. We'll talk about some of those later. But the more the prosecution talked about the calls that were deleted, the more I began to think, I'm not sure if they were deleted. And the prosecution intimates that they're deleted. The way they presented it is they didn't show up when they downloaded his call log, as Alice was saying, which indicates that they're deleted. And that's one of the things I sort of put out there. Why wouldn't they be on there? Because they were deleted. I really think one of the things the defense is going to do is somehow put on somebody who's going to say, no, actually, that's not it. It can happen other ways. Because, I don't know, some of the calls to his wife we're going to talk about, maybe you can see why he would delete them. But there were so many that the prosecution walked through. And the more phone calls the prosecution mentioned that weren't on the Cellbrite analysis, the more I was like, I don't know about this. Because he was deleting calls that really, it didn't make any sense for him to delete if he was deleting them.
And that's a great point, because remember, you want to poke enough holes. So we've been looking at very compelling cell phone evidence that shows that both his wife and his son stopped using their cell phones at a certain time. We saw that, the face recognition came on, didn't unlock, the number of steps. I mean, it seems almost just like the most amazing type of evidence to pin down the crime scene. But if the defense can poke holes into the reliability of these sort of cell phone forensic analyses, then you start questioning everything. Did the phone really get picked up? Did it really walk the many steps? Did it really go, dead at 8:40 something? Or did it just not capture the activity? So even though a lot of the forensic evidence probably is solid, you can see why the defense would want to bring up these types of experts. And we don't know yet. You'll be hearing this after they've had some witnesses up. But I do think that could be very powerful evidence, because so far the timeline based on the cell phones is pretty bad for Alec. Now, according to the prosecution, Alec is also booking it when he's going to see his mother. His speed to his mom hits 75 miles per hour, while his speed back is 80 miles per hour. And the speed limit here is only 55. It's late at night. Remember, it's after 9 p.m., so the road is dark. It's not like a big highway. It's kind of poorly paved with potholes. And it's filled with deer because they're kind of in the country. They're in the middle of nowhere. That's why he's out at his hunting lodge. You usually have a hunting lodge where there's not a lot of roads and buildings so that the animal can come out and feel free to come out for you to go hunt them. Now, this was much faster than when he drove home from work that day, when he averaged closer to the speed limit. At the same time, he is making all these calls and texts. Again, this is just looking at black box data. It's just trying to basically establish differences in patterns that could indicate some state of mind, right? Because you see how it would be less powerful if Alec is just a guy who drives 20 to 25 miles above the speed limit on the regular, whether it's during the day, at night, after he's committed a murder, or when he's coming home from work. If he's always a speedster, doesn't really matter that he's speeding. But what the prosecution's trying to convey here is, no, he drives pretty close to the speed limit, like a normal, speed limit regularly. He's speeding right now because he just killed his family. And there's a lot of adrenaline going on, and he's trying to establish an alibi, get to his mom so that he can say he's been there and pretend he's been there longer than he's actually been there, then speed back and call the police so he can, show that he just happened upon them, that sort of thing. Of course, we don't know what actually happened, but that's kind of what they're trying to get at.
And the defense does a good job at sort of pulling at this. As Alice said, the reason this is significant is the comparison to other times. But really the only other time the prosecution compares it to is Alec's trip there that day after work. The defense points out they didn't look at, the last week of data to see how he drives. They didn't look at how he drives at night versus how he drives during the day. It was much more the police said things, or the witness said things like, I wouldn't even drive this fast with lights and sirens. I wouldn't even drive this fast in an emergency vehicle. And I guess there's two things I'll say about that. Number one, I would remind everyone, circumstantial evidence like this, you don't think of it in isolation. In isolation, this may or may not mean anything to you. It may seem completely innocuous to you. It's really only important when you pair it with everything else. When you pair it with all the other evidence showing that Alec might have been involved in this murder, then maybe it becomes a little bit more significant that he's driving so fast. I think if you look at it in isolation, you're probably going to think of it like I do, which is doesn't seem that significant. As someone who lives or has lived in the middle of nowhere in small southern counties with old roads like this with a 55 mile per hour speed limit that probably should be more like 45, but nevertheless, a road that you drive on at 80 miles per hour is just not weird at all. To me, I don't know. I didn't find this quite as convincing as maybe the prosecution thought it would be, we have a lot of deer too. And sometimes, you're booking it down the road at 80 miles an hour and you see a deer on the side and you're like, whew, glad he stayed over there. So I don't know. I do think, once again, if you just consider this data point with everything else, it's a little bit more convincing. Standing alone, the fact that Alec Murdaugh drives really fast at night doesn't really do a lot for me, but it is interesting that, and they do this with a few other things too. There are a few other data points they use to show comparisons between how he was acting before the murders and around the time of the murders versus, much earlier or much later. So one data point, don't, hang your hat on this, but maybe interesting.
And just so you know, this is every decision you make within a trial. These minutia things the prosecution probably thought about for a really long time, whether to bring it, whether not to bring it. And it's to try to convey the entire story. But it lets you into kind of the story where it's, who knows, it could be a good call or a bad call to bring this type of, information in. But we're putting it out there for you. The data will show that he leaves for his mom's house, or where she's staying, at 9:07 and 6 seconds. He does not stop by the kennels, despite having attempted to reach Maggie on multiple occasions. The data will also show that around this time, Maggie's phone, the backlight turns off for the last time until much later in the night. So Alex Suburban is passing the spot where Maggie's phone will be found the next day. Testimony indicates that picking the phone up and tossing it into the brush would cause the light to come on. Again, we don't know what really happened, but trying to show the timing of what's happening here.
And it's interesting that the defense kind of got whipsawed in this case a little bit. If you followed it, you know that the GM data came in late. They didn't think they had any GM data. And then all of a sudden, halfway through the trial, GM has a bunch of data that's going to allow the prosecution to use this. And the prosecution, as soon as they get it, they give it to the defense. It's not any kind of Brady violation or discovery violation. It's just late discovered evidence, and everybody has to deal with it. And the defense had actually, when all they had was the cell phone data, they had said, you may remember there's that call that Alec makes to Maggie around 9:06, and the orientation of Maggie's phone changes to portrait mode, which indicates somebody picked it up. And this is the last orientation change on the phone. And the defense actually speculated when they were talking about cell phone data that what that was someone driving down the road, picking the phone up, seeing that Alec is calling, and kind of freaking out and throwing Maggie's phone out the window. That's what they were doing at that time. Well, when the prosecution gets the GM data, they're able to show that the person passing that spot where the phone was at the moment that orientation change comes up is not some unknown person. It's Alec. So if the defense's theory is correct, that that's the moment the phone got thrown out the window, it was Alec throwing it out the window. And that's just unfortunate for the defense that they kind of didn't realize they were walking into that because they didn't have that evidence. And this goes back to sort of what Alice was saying about the gotcha moments. You don't have them because ordinarily they would have had all that evidence and they would have known not to say something like that. But because of this sort of late arriving evidence, it ended up being a pretty effective thing for the prosecution. Whether the prosecution will be able to really bring that out in closing, I don't know. But it certainly was something that I think a lot of people noticed during this last witness.
Absolutely. And no, that's not Brady because it's late discovered evidence. As long as you give over the evidence as soon as you have it, there's no violation. And the reason it's late, by the way, is you issue these subpoenas in advance of trial, and the custodians of these records, they're supposed to respond within a certain amount of time. There's a date on the subpoena. It's usually 30 days or the date of the first day of trial. But people are late all the time. This happens, unfortunately, not infrequently. So just so you know, this is not like some conspiracy. This just happens. Now, going back to the defense's alibi filing, they say that at 9:20 p.m., Murdaugh arrives and visits with his mom, who, because of her Alzheimer's, is really not, she's not able to confirm whether he's there or not. She's kind of just there. Now, he spends 25 minutes with her while she's watching a show. At 9:24, Alec calls the caretaker for his mom when he arrives at her home. His mom is asleep when he first arrives, and he sits on her bed with her.
And one thing that I think is interesting is that the alibi filing is always sort of pushing the times a little bit. So the alibi filing has him arriving about 5 minutes earlier than he actually arrives, which we know from the cell phone and the GM stuff. And as you will see, has him leaving a little bit later than he actually leaves. And I mean, these are all estimates that they're making in the alibi filing. They're obviously not going to be completely accurate. So not saying you should make a big deal out of it, but it is interesting to me that their timeline is a little bit friendlier to Murdaugh than the actual timeline.
Which makes sense, right? This is your best story of what happened. Now, 9:34, Rogan Gibbons texts Maggie and says, "Tell Paul to call me." Of course, we know that by that time, there's no more action on Maggie's phone, and the phone indicates that she never reads that text message. At 9:42 and 49 seconds, Alec's phone connects to his car when he turns his car on, and he begins heading back home.
And I think what you see here is, I mean, look, it's hard to say what you make about this. Obviously, if you think Murdaugh is innocent, then you think this is just an innocent visit to see his mom. But there's a couple things that are pretty striking about this. Number one, it is late. She has late-stage Alzheimer's. She's already asleep when he gets there. He's booking it to get there. It takes about 20 minutes to get there. He only stays with her for about 18 minutes. And then he's back in the car heading back home. There's a lot of this that feels like creating an alibi. Maybe it's not, but just the circumstances of him going there, it certainly seems like it was a difficult thing, an inconvenient thing for him, and a disruptive thing for her, for him to even go out there in the first place. But he doesn't. But then when he gets there, he only stays about 15 minutes, a little over 15 minutes, and then he's heading home.
And it's worth noting because let's say that it's a situation where he was supposed to make it out there. He fell asleep and it's late and he's like, I got to go see my mom or she'll be upset. She has dementia. She doesn't remember that he's there. So it's really no difference to her whether he is coming that night or the next morning, especially if she's already asleep. So it cuts against, maybe someone who's waiting at the door saying, but my son said he'd come today. None of that has happened here.
And the person he doesn't go see is his father. His father, who you may recall, went into the hospital that day, and there's been a lot of discussion between the family about going to see him because his days are numbered. And there's testimony, and we'll talk about this as we walk through this, that the reason Maggie came back from the beach was because they were going to go see his father. Obviously, they could have intended to do that the next day, but it is just a little strange that Alec picked this time. It is certainly a coincidence, I'll say that. Maybe it's not strange, but it's certainly a coincidence. And you guys know I don't buy a lot of behavior stuff. I think it's kind of interesting, backwards looking. It's kind of like Nostradamus. You can't ever predict anything from Nostradamus, but when people look back at things that happen, they're like, ha, he predicted that. It's like, okay, well, great. Not very helpful. That's the way I feel about behavior a lot of times. It's if he's guilty, then it's helpful. And if he's not, then it doesn't seem like it's that helpful. But one thing that always strikes me in cases like this is alibi creation and how consistent people are and how they create alibis. They go to places where they're going to be seen. They suddenly are a chatty Cathy. In the case of him, he's calling everybody in the world while he's driving. 80 miles an hour down the road, he's sending text messages. He's calling people on the phone. He's going to see his mom. He's seeing the caretaker. I mean, it feels a lot like alibi creation, which obviously, if he did it, is exactly what it is. And I don't know, like I said, this seems like the kind of thing that it is only helpful if you have a lot of other evidence to convince you that he did it. This is the kind of thing that helps you be sure in your decision you've already made. And that's an important part of circumstantial evidence. People attack circumstantial evidence. They attack forensic evidence a lot of times. And when they do it, they always attack it as if it's the only evidence. So they'll say things like, how can you convict somebody on this questionable forensic evidence? Well, you probably shouldn't. But if you have a whole bunch of other evidence, and then you have some fibers that happen to match, ordinarily fiber evidence, not that helpful. But when it's attached to all this other evidence, then it becomes kind of convincing. To me, this is similar. When you have all the other evidence of what Murdaugh may have done, this event is something that kind of pushes you to think, yeah, your interpretation of that other evidence as indicating he killed somebody is probably correct. So going back to the filing, the alibi filing, they say that he leaves at 9:45, which is consistent with what we said about them sort of pushing the stuff a little bit. He actually leaves around 9:43. 9:45 is only 2 minutes later, but you know, when you add 2 minutes on the back end and you add a few minutes on the front end, all of a sudden you're there more like half an hour instead of 18 minutes or however long he was actually there. In any event, he leaves to return to Moselle, and once again, he is firing up the phone lines. He is calling a bunch of people. He speaks again to Chris Wilson, who is a friend of his and a lawyer. As a fact, he is one of Murdaugh's best friends. They'd known each other for forever. They had become close in law school, and they would often work together and split fees. In fact, it was Chris Wilson that had worked on the trucker case that we talked about last time, the one that resulted in the $792,000 fee payment that should have gone to the law firm, but instead went into Alec's pocket, the same fee that his law firm had confronted him about on that day. And Chris Wilson testifies that fee was not discussed during these conversations. At 9:45 and 32 seconds, Alec calls Maggie. According to the prosecution, this is one of those calls that is not on his call list when they download his phone, indicating to them at least that he will later delete the record of this call. The thing that is strange about this to me, and some of the other ones we're going to talk about, Alec is driving back to the farm. He is creating an alibi. He is trying to present himself as being innocent. Some of the other calls, I can see why he would delete them. I don't understand why you would delete this one. And I don't understand why he would delete the next one, which was a call to Paul, which also doesn't appear on his call log. Why would you delete those calls when they help to establish that you didn't do it?
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense at all. Unless then you start getting down this rabbit hole. And, you know, a lot of people have tried to give him a lot of credit and said that he carried out the perfect crime. First of all, he clearly didn't, because he was charged and he's currently in trial for it. So just by the way, he's not like as smart as maybe some people are giving him credit for. But if he is trying to think like chess game and trying to think many steps ahead, you can imagine how if he makes these calls and deletes them, he's thinking later on, why would you delete this? And if they have cell phone records that place me somewhere, I can point to the faultiness of the records. Then we start really getting into rabbit trails. So I don't actually think that's what happened, but I'm just pointing out the fact that a lot of people have said that he seems to have carried out the perfect crime. I disagree with that. But if he were to have deleted these records, it may have been like trying to do chess thinking.
Well, look, he certainly did things that if he's guilty were very helpful for him. He did things like go back to the farm and get a shotgun, which he would have known would put gunshot residue on him. He did things like, he did that after going to supposedly check on Maggie and Paul when he found them, which would have put their blood and their DNA on him, which him getting back into his car and driving up to the farmhouse would also have put that in the car, which means any sort of forensic evidence you find in the car, you find on him, is much less valuable. And I do think he probably was thinking about that kind of stuff when he did those things. So does it seem a little crazy that he would think that far ahead? Yes, but he clearly thought about some other stuff, and he was an assistant solicitor. He had been around criminal cases. He knew the kind of evidence the police would use, and he would have known that cell phones are always important. So who knows? Maybe he is that smart that he would delete these calls to undermine the rest of the forensic evidence. And I guess we'll just see what the defense does. If they really hit on this, then maybe he did do that. And he told them, well, you know, you should really hit on this because why would I do that? And we'll see what they say about it. It's kind of like they made a big deal. And in fact, one of the defense attorneys, the main defense attorney, not Pooty Poot, but the guy who's really the defense attorney, the one who cross-examines most of the people, the one who appeared in the HBO documentary, whose name escapes me right this second, but y'all, if you follow the case, you know what I'm talking about. He actually just published an op-ed in the Washington Post. I don't know if you saw this, Alice.
Who the heck
saying
has time?
That,
Gosh.
Well, it's all about how the police bungled the investigation, and because they didn't maintain the crime scene, the whole case is compromised. So it's like the prosecution concludes their case, and then they publish an op-ed in the Washington Post laying out that argument. What's funny about that to me, the argument that the crime scene is compromised and they didn't do a better job searching the house, even if that's true, that only hurts the prosecution. They wouldn't have found evidence in the house of some random killer. They only would have found evidence that Alec Murdaugh did it. And so it's funny to me that they're using that. Well, they didn't investigate enough to attack him, when if they'd investigated more, the only person they would have discovered evidence of would have been Alec. So I don't know, they're sort of pulling out the stops. We'll just have to see what they say about these cell phones. So at 9:47:23, Alec texts Maggie, "Call me, babe," which once again is inconsistent with him deleting the phone call he'd made only 2 minutes before, because that would have been perfectly consistent with him trying to get in touch with her. So I don't know what's going on there. At 9:52:15, Alec texts Chris Wilson, who he's called a couple times, asking him to call him. He is driving about 80 miles per hour when he sends this text. So not only is he driving really fast on a curvy, bad road with deer jumping over his car every other turn, but he's texting while he's doing it. So whatever. At 9:56:57 to 10:06:57, Alec registers 231 steps. Obviously, not all of these steps are happening at all the times during that period, as he is also driving during that period. And we mentioned this when we talked about some of the steps in the last episode, and how the defense had tried to make hay out of the fact that Alec was recording steps while the other phone was not. And we had said that is a period where it's recording steps. You're not walking during that entire period. And in fact, there was testimony on Friday to exactly that point, that is just the phone records steps over a period. It's impossible to say during that period when exactly you were walking and when you weren't. So the steps thing is something the prosecution has used. It's something the defense has tried to turn to its own advantage. But in the end, other than some of the things we're going to talk about later on about the steps, it's probably not as helpful as some people might have thought.
Now, continuing on the alibi filing, at 10 p.m., the defense says that Murdaugh arrives back at Moselle. 10 o'clock and 30 seconds, Murdaugh's phone arrives into Moselle. And at 10 o'clock and 36 seconds, his car is put into the park position. At 10:01, 17 seconds, his SUV is put out of the park position. At 10:01 and 29 seconds, so just a couple seconds later, the SUV is put back into park. And at 10:01 and 30 seconds, so 1 second later, the car is pulled out of park yet again. At 10:01, 43 seconds, his car is put in park. So in the span of like 30 seconds, 45 seconds, he basically puts his car in park, out of park, in park, out of park, and back to park. So he does it like 3 times. And it's in very, very fast succession.
And I have no idea what was going on during that time. And I don't know that anybody does, but it's one of the weird things that the data shows. It's hard to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe, yeah, I have nothing. I have nothing except that it's a lot of car action in the span of like 30 seconds.
And this is all when he's at the main house, by the way. Like, he goes to the main house first, and all this in and out stuff is presumably his car sitting in front of the main house. So I guess if he were to testify, which we don't know if he will, maybe he would say, well, I was, the first time I wanted to see if they were there, then they weren't there, and then I was like, I'll go down to the kennels, and then I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. And then I thought, oh, well, yeah, maybe I should. And then I was like, oh, no, I'm just going to sit here. I mean, who knows? But
but it happens so quickly, like, right? One of the changes in position happens within 1 second. I will say, I have been in very frazzled situations before, like a medical emergency, and I literally don't know what to do next. And I've been like, get out of the car, in the car, out the car, like I've had to take my kid to the emergency room before, right? And that was like a very frazzling moment where I'm like, I need to get the diaper bag. No, I need to get this. What do I have to do now? And like the rush of adrenaline has me do kind of erratic movements. We have no idea what's going on here, but I would describe that chain of events within 30 seconds as kind of erratic. That's not your normal parking behavior.
And once again, interesting little thing there that Alice is pointing out, because this is purely circumstantial evidence. But if he's in a heightened state at this point, that's evidence that he killed somebody, because there's no other reason for him to be in a heightened state. He gets back and the family's still just down with the dogs. I mean, he could totally just think that. But it seems to show that he is in some sort of erratic state. And it also shows you, and the other thing it shows you is, it seems like he didn't spend a whole lot of time up at the house looking for them in the house, because he puts his car in park at 10 and 36 seconds, and then it's out of park in 10:17, so only another 40 seconds or so later. So if you think he got up there, got out, went into the house, kind of looked for him for a little while, didn't find anybody, and then got back into his car, well, I don't know if he had enough time to do all that.
The Prosecutors Podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Hey everyone, whether you love true crime or comedy, celebrity interviews, news, or even motivational speakers, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue, right? And guess what? Now you can call the shots on your auto insurance too. Enter the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. The Name Your Price tool puts you in charge of your auto insurance by working just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance. Then they'll show you a variety of coverages that fit within your budget, giving you options. Now that's something you'll want to press play on. It's easy to start a quote, and you'll be able to choose the best option for you fast. It's just one of the many ways you can save with Progressive Insurance. Quote today at Progressive.com to try the Name Your Price tool for yourself and join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. When you're at your best, you can do great things, but sometimes life gets you bogged down and you may feel overwhelmed or like you're not showing up in the way that you want to. We are so excited about our sponsor, BetterHelp, because honestly, working full-time, being a mom, just trying to get through each day can be overwhelming at times. But working with a therapist can help you get closer to the best version of you, because when you feel empowered, you're more prepared to take on everything life throws at you. So if you're thinking of giving therapy a try, BetterHelp is a great option. It's convenient, flexible, affordable, and entirely online. You just have to fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. If you want to live a more empowered life, therapy can get you there. Visit BetterHelp.com/prosecutors today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/prosecutors. When it comes to Valentine's Day, I am all about candy. Let's be honest, I'm always all about candy because you guys know I love gummy bears. And that's why I am loving Native's new limited edition Candy Shop collection. Like all Native products, they're thoughtfully formulated to keep me feeling and smelling deliciously fresh all day long. You guys know Native for their aluminum-free deodorant. Native keeps their ingredients list bare naked, with ingredients you understand like coconut oil, shea butter, and baking soda. Native deodorant checks a lot of boxes: 72-hour odor protection, naturally derived ingredients, and a smooth residue-free application. Native also offers a variety of scents, with new and limited edition scents being released all the time. When you use Native, you will smell amazing all day long thanks to their long-lasting scents. Want to smell spicy and woodsy, sweet or clean and fresh? Native has a scent option for everyone. For me, I am loving their limited edition Candy Shop collection. I got the Gummy Bears version and it smells delicious. Now is the time to make the switch from an antiperspirant to Native. When you visit their site, you can discover all their fresh scents and maybe even try out one of their body washes while you're at it. Right now, go to nativedeo.com/prosecutors or use promo code prosecutors at checkout to get a sweet 20% off your first order. That's nativedeo.com/prosecutors or use promo code prosecutors at checkout for 20% off your first order, and see why we love Native. Angie's List is now Angi, and they've made it easier than ever to get all your home projects done right. I've been really busy, and I actually had my refrigerator broke, but thankfully I was able to look on Angi to have an appliance repair person come and fix my refrigerator. It was so easy, so amazing, and all I had to do was click on a couple links and they got me the best prices for an appliance repairman. Angi has over 20 years of home service experience, and they've combined it with new tools to simplify the whole process. Just bring them to your project online or with the Angi app and answer a few questions, and Angi can handle the rest from start to finish. Or help you see ratings and reviews, compare quotes from local pros, and connect instantly, which means you can cross things off your to-do list in just a few taps. Because whether it's routine maintenance or a dream remodel, Angi is here to make it easy. So get your next project done with the help of a pro from Angi. Download the free Angi mobile app today or visit Angi.com. That's ANGI.com.
And that's a great point, Brett. Whatever the reasons for movements are, it seems based on the timeline very unlikely that he fully got out of the car. The matter of seconds in between doesn't really leave you a lot of time to get out of the car, walk up the steps, by the way, that, a housekeeper died on, and go into the house, call around for your family members, walk back down the stairs, get into the car, change it out of park. So that's a really good point there. Now, 10:03 and 58 seconds. There's a missed call from Alec to Maggie, yet again. At 10:04 and 49 seconds, the SUV is pulled out of park and the car leaves the main house where it's been this whole time. Continuing on their alibi, the defense says at 10:05 p.m., Murdaugh discovers Maggie and Paul's bodies because he leaves the main house, drives down to the kennel, and that's when he discovers their bodies. At 10:05 and 57 seconds, his SUV is put in park, and that's when it arrives at the kennels, and that's where the defense comes up with the 10:05 timeline. By the way, when you see the body cams of all these videos, it is pitch black, and you're out in the country, and the kennels are in, kind of a little bit away from the house. And so it's not like it's totally lit up. It's not very easy to see. There are lights in the kennels, but you have to walk kind of a ways to get to the kennels, even where you park your car. At 10:06 and 14 seconds, Murdaugh calls 911. This is about 20 seconds after Alec puts the car in park at the kennels. So the reason I kind of laid out what the kennels look like for you is because if you believe the defense's alibi, in 20 seconds, he would have needed to drive up to the kennels, put his car in park, gotten out of the car, find the bodies, which are in two different locations, not too far from each other, but they are in different locations. And remember what typically happens when you find one dead body? You're probably freaking out about that body rather than looking around. Shock definitely enters at that moment. They are not right next to each other where if you found one body, you'd immediately look over and see that there was another body. You'd have to walk several steps and kind of go under a little ceiling thing where the kennels are to see Paul's body. Do the things that he testified or said that he's done, right? Including picking up Paul's phone, attempting to turn him over, and then call 911. Could he have done that in 20 seconds? Possibly. But that's a lot of things that had to happen. Again, he doesn't pull up to the bodies, get out and see two bodies. Pulls up, parks, gets out, walks, somehow stumbles upon probably Maggie's body first, and then look around, see Paul's body, fiddle with his phone, try to see if there's signs of life, even though we know that there's brain matter burst out of his head. So it's very unlikely that he's going to find signs of life, then call 911.
And we said that this is a timeline case in so many ways, and this is an important place where that is obvious. In the alibi filing, they say, oh, it's 10:05. That's when he showed up. And he actually shows up at 10:05 and 57 seconds. Ordinarily, those 57 seconds wouldn't be that important, but here they actually really are, for all the reasons that Alice just said. If he actually was there 57 seconds earlier, that gives him a lot more time to do all this. There's a little confusion about the 911 call. It was either at 10:06:14 or 10:06:18, so you got a 4-second difference there, which once again, in the case with this kind of timeline is very important. But max, that's 21 seconds between when the SUV is put into park and when he calls 911. This is another one of those, the GM data really kind of did a number on the defense, because now we know exactly when he got there, when he got to the kennels. And look, the defense did a couple things on cross to try and mitigate this. Number one, they had the guy set an alarm for 20 seconds and start the countdown, because they knew that 20 seconds where you're standing around doing nothing, it's kind of like watching water boil, is always going to seem longer than 20 seconds in any other facet of your life. So they did that to show just how long 20 seconds is. I thought even when they did that, it didn't seem like that long to me.
It did not seem long at all.
But they did it.
Remember, these decisions you make, you're hoping for the best, but it's not like everything is always going to go your way.
They tried to say, well, maybe, the lights would have illuminated one of the bodies from his car. They tried to get the guy to say that. And he was like, I don't know, maybe it did, to try and spark he was moving around quickly or whatever. But 20 seconds is just not that much time, particularly given that he says he went up to both bodies. He checked for a pulse because he had to say all these things, remember, because he needs to get some DNA and blood maybe on him from them. So if there is any, that's the way he can talk about it. The cell phone thing is rough for him because he says that when he tried to turn Paul over, so not only did he check him for a pulse, he tried to turn him over, that his cell phone fell out of his pocket. He picked up his cell phone to do something with it, decided better of it, and put it back down on Paul, which is also, he probably picked up Paul's cell phone at some point during the murders and needed to explain why his fingerprints would be on it or whatever, or why it would be in the weird place it was. In any event, if he did all those things, it's just really hard to imagine he did them in 20 seconds. 20 seconds is not that long. But that is what the timeline tells us had to have happened. He had to have done all that in at most 21 seconds. And just look, getting back to getting your phone out and dialing 911, just doing that is going to take 4 seconds, 5 seconds, just to pull up your phone, get to the dialing pad, type in 911 and hit send. It's going to take a few seconds. So this was rough. As rough as a lot of the timeline has been for him managing to do all the things that he himself said he did in 20 seconds is even worse for him. So he's down there for 5 minutes or so on the phone with 911. At some point, he tells 911 he's going to get himself a shotgun because obviously there's been this horrible murder and he needs protection. At 10:11 and 54 seconds, his SUV is out of park and leaving the kennels. He gets up to the main house. He goes in and grabs a shotgun. He then gets back into his SUV at 10:13 and 54 seconds and is heading back to the kennels. Important point here, and we said a little bit about this before, getting into the SUV and driving back up to the house means, because he's interacted with the bodies, he now can explain any physical evidence in his vehicle. It is from when he interacted with the bodies. He goes up, he gets a shotgun. He knows there's going to be gunshot residue on that shotgun. It's now on him, and now it's also going to be on the SUV, that's one of the pieces of evidence the prosecution put in, was there's gunshot residue on the steering wheel of the Suburban, and the defense can very easily say, of course there was, because he went and got a shotgun. If he's guilty, these are really smart things he did that would have been, if he hadn't done this, if he got out of the SUV and stood around waiting for the police to show up, and the police show up and he never got back in that vehicle and they found Maggie and Paul's blood and gunshot residue in that vehicle, that would have been slam dunk. He's done. But because he did these things, you can't say that those are definitive pieces of evidence, which I think is, Alice has said he's not a master criminal, but that was pretty smart. And Alice's theory about him deleting the phone calls after he did that kind of stuff, maybe that is what he was doing.
There's definitely something going on, right? Like we've said, the state of frenzy is at least in the records. You can sit there and poke at your park and drive buttons on your car and not be frenetic. That's very possible. But even if you planned a murder and you knew it was going to happen, whether it was planned or not, there is a lot of cortisol running through your body. And so even the most calm of criminals are probably going to be in a heightened state. And I say all this because it's probably didn't come out of nowhere. If Alec did it, it probably was planned to some degree. Some elements of it may have been planned. So I do think he had time, if it were him, to have thought of these cover-up moments, even if he himself was in a heightened frenetic state.
So at 10:17, the 911 call ends. At some point, we're going to play you sort of the relevant part of the 911 call. But he's on the phone with him for a while. He doesn't do the thing where he hangs up after a couple minutes. He stays on 911 with them for a while. But at that point, the call ends. He's now waiting for the police to get there. At 10:18 and 08 seconds, the backlight on Paul's phone comes on. Not entirely sure why that happened. One thing that's interesting about Paul's phone is an hour before this, when he's taking that video of the dog, his phone is at 2% battery. And in some ways, this trial has been an advertisement for Apple battery life, because his phone was at 2% battery and doesn't die until much later. Now, one thing that tells you, he wasn't using his phone much after it was at 2%. The other thing is, there was some testimony about because his battery was so low, there's a lot of times when your light will come on. You know, if you get a text, for instance, your screen will light up. But a lot of times when you get below a certain battery level, that stops, and you stop seeing that. And it only comes on when there's actually some sort of physical interaction with the phone. So this is interesting that his backlight all of a sudden is coming on at this point. But we don't know exactly why, and nothing much happens. But the things we're talking about here actually are important. This is not just whatever. At 10:19:32, Alec calls Randy Murdaugh, who is his brother. At 10:19:44, he calls his other brother, John Marvin. This was another thing that was prosecution tried to make some hay of, him calling these two people immediately after talking 911. Didn't really impact me much at all. Totally could imagine an innocent Alec Murdaugh. The thing he's going to do, maybe even before he calls 911, but certainly after he calls, is call his brothers. That just didn't surprise me at all. So I didn't really think much of that. But the next part was interesting. So he calls his brothers. They don't answer. At 10:20:08, Paul's phone display comes on again, but this time it engages the screen auto lock. And there was testimony that the reason it would do this is much like what we talked about earlier, that this is sort of a facial recognition thing. It's not seeing Paul's face, and so it remains locked. Now, what is interesting about this is even though it's in a locked state, you would see, and I don't have an Apple, so I can't confirm or deny this, but you would see the last message on the phone, the sort of indication of a message received. And the last message Paul had received that night was from Rogan Gibson. It was Yo, I think. It was, you remember, Rogan Gibson is the guy he was talking to the entire time about the dog, sending videos, trying to do FaceTime, texting back and forth, and then all of a sudden it stops. And Rogan, who still wants to know about his dog, is texting him about his dog. He's calling him multiple times. He's texting Maggie to try and get her to tell Paul, like, WTF, man, why all of a sudden did you stop talking to me? And he also has texted him Yo, once again, trying to reestablish connection with him. Well, that's at 10:20:08. Between 10:21 and 10:30, Rogan Gibson has 4 missed calls from Alec Murdaugh. At 10:24, Alec sends a message to him saying, call me. At 10:25, Alec sends a FaceTime call to Rogan Gibson. What in the world is going on there? It really makes you wonder what it was that Alec was so concerned about. You could imagine he's just trying to tell one of Paul's best friends about what had happened to him, but he had also called Randy and John. He only called them once. It wasn't as urgent for him to get in touch with his brothers, apparently, as it was to get in touch with Rogan. And all of this happens after Paul's cell phone comes back on and after that message would have been visible. But all this stops. 10:25 is the last time, or that's the FaceTime call. Then you have the first responders arriving at around the exact same time.
And you know, Brett, I was breathing because I was like, man, I hope I never have to be in the situation where I find my family members dead in front of me. But like, I'm not sure I'm calling a kid. Like, I probably don't have my wits about me to do much but call 911, if that. But like, to call him by FaceTime right when, like, why Rogan of all people, right? Rogan is clearly trying to get in contact with Paul, but the number of calls that Alec is giving to his dead son's friend, not his son's girlfriend or fiance or some, you know, someone that close. I mean, this is just a friend. I couldn't care less about the dog's tail at this time. I just found my family members with their brains blown out. I have other things on my mind. And spend so much of your kind of mental energy in this emotional state on contacting him. It reads strange. We don't know what's in his mind, but it is certainly a strange behavior.
And I think one possibility, and really the one that makes the most sense to me, Alec probably doesn't know about the video. He probably doesn't know about the video. The prosecution has sort of hinted at maybe he was trying to get into Paul's phone to delete the video. Maybe. That's a theory, but I don't think he knew about the video. But I think he did know, or he realized maybe at this point, maybe he had some vague notion of it, but realized at this point that Paul had been on the phone with Rogan down there at the kennels with the dog. And he might have thought to himself when he saw this text, what if Rogan heard me in the background? Because remember, he has to give them a story. And very soon, He's going to have to give a story. It's coming. The moment where he's going to have to tell him exactly what he did that night is coming. The story he wants to tell is, I was asleep on the couch. I got up. I couldn't get in touch with him, but no big deal. I drove out to see my mom. I came back and massacre. That's the story he wants to tell.
And remember, Brett, what happened after Paul's devastating boat crash where likely one of his friends was dead? They were running around the hospital, not checking on even the state of health for Paul. They were trying to get their alibi straight.
I think that's what he's trying to do here. I think he wants to talk to him, Rogan, who's asleep. He's like me. He likes to go to bed around 10. He wants to talk to him and feel him out and figure out what Rogan knows. And if he had talked to Rogan that night and Rogan had said, oh yeah, y'all were all down at the kennel, I can't believe something like this happened, his story would have been different. He would have then adjusted. I don't know how he would have done it. He would have had to do it on the fly, but he would have adjusted his alibi story to put himself at the kennels, but then leave much earlier than, well, as early as he could, right? But he certainly wouldn't tell the story about being asleep on the couch. And so that's what I think this is about. I don't think it was he wanted to get in the phone to delete the video, because I don't think he knew about the video. But I think he did know that it was possible that Rogan knew he was down at the kennels because Paul had been talking to him at the time. So I think that is what he was trying to do. And, he just never could get in touch with Rogan because Rogan had already gone to bed. And so he had to stick with his original story and just sort of hope that it would be fine. And it would have been fine if it weren't for the video, because I don't think Rogan had any idea that he was down there were it not for the video. But of course, we know the video exists now, and we know it's completely inconsistent with the story he's going to tell the police. First responders show up at 10:25. 10:29, Alec's calling Randy again. 10:30, he calls Rogan Gibson again. 10:34, Paul's battery finally dies. And then 10:35, Alec calls his brother, John Marvin Murdaugh, again. And then that's sort of the end of the timeline for that night. At that point, the police have shown up. The investigators have shown up. They are now talking to him. His time of communicating with the outside world is over. And at this point, he is going to be interviewed and he's going to have to explain his view of what exactly happened that night.
And this is why going back 100 years on this case and also back to the boat case is very enlightening, because we have the footage of how the Murdaughs are acting at the hospital after a very, very tragic event has happened, and it's currently still unfolding. We've kind of gone back and forth and joked a little bit about, how smart is he in covering up and how much he's thought about this. Most people are not thinking about alibis right after a tragedy, even those who commit the crime. And clearly this is a family who's had some experience in having to do some quick cleanup as recently as Paul's boat accident that summer. And now we have kind of this frenzy of activity, but he doesn't have much time. The police arrive. And remember what this is all surrounding. His father, Randolph Murdaugh, who has kind of been there for him financially, has bailed him out several times financially, was put in the hospital and was expected to die. And in fact, he did die just a few days later on June 10th. On June 17th, Alec's brothers, John Marvin Murdaugh and Randy Murdaugh, the fourth, appear on Good Morning America. They describe Alec as just devastated and afraid after these murders. There's this attack on their family, and they're pleading to the public for sympathy for their brother. On June 21st, the South Carolina State Law Enforcement Division, or SLED, released a statement on this case. Now, at the time, Solicitor Stone says he's not yet recusing himself because it's not obvious that Alec will be a suspect. I think this is really interesting that 4 days earlier, his brothers are already going on the offensive, knowing this does not look good for Alec, right? This is part of the whole let's make sure everything's covered up, everything is clean as much as we can. Before he is even pointed at as the suspect, let's get out there and stir up sympathy for our brother. This is on a national stage. This isn't just down at the corner store in the Low Country. This is on Good Morning America. These people have access to major channels of communication. And you see that their friend, Mr. Solicitor Stone over here, is also still playing the game of, I don't know if it's really him. By the way, if you're found with blood on you, it's not visible to the eye, but if you're the one who finds your wife and son murdered, that probably is enough to have some separation from the office that you volunteer in. Doesn't have to be that you are automatically a suspect. You are already on the list of people to be looked into and who need to be cleared by the solicitor's office as soon as you are the one to have found your family members shot dead.
He should have recused the next day.
The next day.
It's ridiculous that he didn't.
It really is ridiculous. On the next day, June 22nd, SLED reopens the investigation. They don't say anything about Murdaugh, but they reopen the investigation into the death of Stephen Smith. Remember Stephen Smith? The young man who was found in the middle of the road, dead, seemingly from a hit and run, but questions about whether it was a hit and run. And the agency says that the case is being reopened based on information gathered while investigating the deaths of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh. What? Like that?
Yeah.
What?
And we're going to talk a lot more about him and everything that happened with that case, but this is weird. This is weird, and this is honestly still a mystery. And we're going to talk about it, but it's still a mystery. This may be one of those things that unravels at some point well after this trial is over.
Okay, we're moving through the timeline, getting through the summer. On June 25th, Alec announces a $100,000 reward for information on the murders. So he's putting up money himself, which is a great move if you're trying to say, I'm not the one who murdered them. On August 11th, due to the developments in the SLED investigation, the local solicitor, Duffy Stone, finally recuses. What is that, Brett? More than 2 months after the murders, which is a very long time. And the reason you recuse right away is that you don't want any sort of impartiality to even influence who you think is the suspect. And he's clearly on the list of people to be cleared.
And if you talk to people in South Carolina about this case, even non-conspiratorial people, they will tell you that there are a lot of folks who think that in that time when Stone was still involved, that there was evidence that was disposed of that would have been even more damning for Murdaugh. Obviously, that is probably a conspiracy theory, but that's what happens when you should recuse and you don't recuse, is people are going to assume that you're sticking around for a reason, and it's to help your friend. We'll never know whether that's true or not, but it was, number one, not a good look for him to do it. And this is not a political show. We're not going to get political here, but the good people of South Carolina who decide who to elect for their solicitors might consider this when the next ballot comes around. I'll just say that. So that's August 11. September 2nd, things go wonky for Murdaugh again. You may recall, coincidentally, of course, on the day that his wife and son were murdered, he had been confronted by his law firm about $792,000 that should have been in the accounts that weren't. Obviously, once this happens, there was a great moment during the trial where the prosecution is talking to one of his paralegals, a paralegal who realized this was happening and turned it into the firm, even though she was afraid she might get fired for doing it. They might just try and cover it up. They didn't do that, but that was her concern when she turned it over. And the prosecution asks, after you heard about the murders, what did you do about the $792,000? And she said, what $792,000? And her point being, it didn't matter at all. After that happened, we completely stopped thinking about that. Everybody sort of rallies around Alec, and that remains until September 2nd. On September 2nd, another paralegal, actually it might have been the same paralegal, they're trying to help out Alec. He's obviously not coming into the office as much. They're trying to deal with some of his files and some of his cases. She is going through his desk looking for a file. She picks up a file and out slips a check. That check turns out to be a canceled check made out to Murdaugh personally instead of the firm, which, as we've said, big no-no. That's not what you're supposed to do. The firm, who had held off looking into Murdaugh due to the ongoing murder investigation, now they renew their efforts to figure out what is going on and just how big is this. And what they find is they find a bunch of old settlements that Murdaugh had been involved in and numerous checks made payable to Forge. Now, Forge is an entity they would recognize because there is an entity called Forge Consulting LLC. And Forge Consulting LLC is an entity that collects big settlements that people have in the kind of cases this law firm deals with, and they help structure those settlements for the people who are involved, who, number one, have probably never had that much money before, don't really know what they're doing with it, are in situations where they need sort of long-term financial security, and that's what they do. They make a lot of money doing it, and they're a very powerful entity. Well, Murdaugh, clever fella that he is, creates at the Bank of America a Forge account. Not Forge Consulting LLC, but Forge. And it's really Alec Murdaugh doing business as Forge. And the thinking is, when people see Forge on the check, they'll just assume it's going to Forge Consulting, which is normal, not to the fake Forge, which is actually Alec Murdaugh. And it doesn't take long for the law firm to figure out what is happening here. They figure out that Forge Consulting doesn't even have an account at Bank of America. They figure out that Forge is really Alec Murdaugh doing business as Forge, and now they know all of this money, millions of dollars. At that point, they don't know how much, but they know it's going to be a lot, has been funneled to Alec. The first thing they do is they go to his brother, who is also a partner at the firm, and say, look, this is what he did, which is breaks his brother's heart, obviously. And they all decide, well, number one, he's got to go, and we've got a lot of work to do. The amount of money that this law firm has ended up having to pay out to people, that the partners have had to cough up to make good for all the money that Alec stole, it's approaching $10 million, maybe more than that amount of money. The law firm, which, as we said before, had been Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Ellsroth, and Dietrich, PMPED. They dropped Murdaugh from the name of the firm. They renamed the firm altogether, and his brother actually has to leave the firm and form his own litigation group. So this is like a big deal. It's a huge deal. And it's exactly what you have to imagine Alec knew would happen on June 7th. When that first domino fell, he knew, if the dominoes keep falling, if I don't stop it, this is what's going to happen. The collapse of everything my family's worked on, the destruction of not only my name and not only all my money and my legal career and everything else, but really the entire legacy of the family and the family name. And that's exactly what happens.
And this is the only choice, right? This is literally the only choice, because as a law firm, it's surprising that you can even survive something like your named partner pulling off a fraud like this. It's no surprise that they had to do this, and they should. I mean, ethically, they had to do this. But Murdaugh, like you said, knew exactly what was going to happen, and this just fell a little bit later. I know there's a lot of critique of people who say, oh, he just, it's not convincing to say that he murdered his own family just to buy some time. I don't necessarily think that's the case. This was always going to happen, because once the chips started to fall, the house was crumbling around him. It was just a matter of time. And maybe the murders delayed this a little bit, but it was always going to happen. And he would have known that nothing would have completely stopped this from happening. Once they found that one string they kept pulling, they would see all of the financial fraud that was happening. And that's exactly what happened.
So yeah, everything's falling apart for Alec. He now, quote unquote, resigns from his firm, though we all know he was fired. This is the day after this check is discovered on September 3rd. A month later, the law firm will end up suing him. Talk about turning the tables. And you can imagine, this is a small firm. It was a family. They described it as a brotherhood. This had to be, I mean, whatever you think of these people, there's no indication that everybody else in the law firm was corrupt or doing anything wrong. It's hard to even imagine the shock that must have just rippled through this group of people. Because remember, when the murders first happened, a lot of them were afraid because they didn't know. Maybe it was about the boat case, or maybe it was an angry litigant. Maybe it was somebody they sued. Maybe it was somebody that was going to come after them too. And now they're starting to see that Alec Murdaugh had really sort of sold a lot of their futures too. I mean, they are probably will be working for a while to pay back everything that he stole. On September 4th, so the next day, so he resigned September 4th. That morning, Chris Wilson, who is one of the people Alec called the night of the murders, and Alec meet. Remember, they are best buds, best friends. And Alec admits that he stole the money from the $792,000 in fees that were supposed to be split over that trucker lawsuit. Wilson is absolutely furious about this. Alec breaks down crying. He tells him that he's had an opioid problem for a very long time, and he's been spending a lot of money on that, and that he has screwed him over, and he's screwed a lot of people over. When Wilson leaves, he's not sure how Murdaugh is going to be able to fix this, and really he feels like this is it. You know, his career's over, his life's over, everything is falling apart for him, and Chris Wilson is going to have a lot of problems as well because of this, because now he's on the hook for a lot of money too. At 1:30 that day, Alec Murdaugh is changing a tire on the side of the road when someone passes him, turns around and asks if Alec needs any help. Murdaugh had one of those fancy cars with the tires that you can drive on forever, even if you have a flat. But apparently, for some reason, he decided he was going to change his tire. He says, no, I'm good. I don't need any help. At this point, the person who had stopped to help him pulls out a gun and shoots him in the head. Murdaugh will call 911. He will be airlifted to Savannah. There's what is described as an entry and exit wound on his head, though in fact it's more like sort of a trench, almost like a valley. It's as if whoever shot him, the bullet just sort of grazed his head. Now, it did do sort of enough damage to cause a skull fracture, though it seems like the skull fracture is very minor, and there is some bleeding on the brain. Harpootlian talks about this all the time as if he was, struggling on the verge of death, but it seems like this was about as minor a gunshot wound to the head as you could possibly have. You could not be more fortunate if you were shot in the head than Alec Murdaugh was. Assuming that, being shot in the head doesn't automatically mean that you're not fortunate, but he was. So he's pretty much good. He's fine. He's able to talk to the police, and he describes the shooter as a white fella, much younger than him, with really short hair.
Wow. This is just a crazy turn of events, right? The morning that he admits all this is happening, he gets shot. I mean, goodness gracious, that's devastating that he's shot in the head. And just about a week later, on September 12th, the police arrest the shooter. And he was a white fella, but he was not younger than Murdaugh, not even close. He was clearly rough looking and older than Murdaugh, and he didn't have short hair. And, very interestingly, he was not a stranger to Murdaugh. He was, in fact, someone who Alec knew quite well. It was Curtis Edward Smith who had done the shooting, and he'd done it at Murdaugh's request. Murdaugh had represented Smith before, and more importantly, Smith provided Alec with the OxyContin he'd become addicted to. Murdaugh admitted that he'd asked Smith to shoot him so that he could secure $10 million in insurance money for his son Buster. And that's because there's usually a suicide carve-out in insurance. Like if you kill yourself, you usually don't get the insurance payout to prevent a sort of perverse incentive to kill yourself in order to provide for your family. Now, if Smith was supposed to kill Alec, he did a terrible job of it. Murdaugh went to a drug rehab soon after this event, and then, as we know, Alec will be arrested on many, many, many financial charges, and also for the murder of his family.
And that sort of gets us to where we are now with this trial. This insurance thing is kind of interesting. There's two things about it. Number one, as Alice said, ordinarily, if you have life insurance, you can't kill yourself and recover it for obvious reasons. But most life insurance policies also have a timing trigger. So basically, if you've had it long enough, then they're not going to look into how you died. They'll just pay it. And Alec, I guess to his shock, had that. So he actually could have committed suicide and the money would have still been paid out. The other thing, some people have questioned whether this insurance policy even exists or not. And maybe it doesn't, though I would think if it did not, that would have come out by now. The reason they do this is because there was a witness, the person who represented the Beach family in the boat crash lawsuit, Mark Tinsley, I believe is his name. And at some point he says that Alec didn't have life insurance. And the point that he's pointing out there is his assets. Life insurance was not one of them. There are two different kinds of life insurance. One is an investment and one is literally just insurance on your life. So if you have whole life insurance, little insurance lesson for those of you out there, if you have whole life insurance, that's an investment. You're paying into it. You can actually cash it out. And when you cash it out, you'll get money back. It's very expensive. Most people will tell you that it's a terrible investment and there's a lot better things you can do with your money. Instead, you should get term life insurance. Term life insurance is not an investment. It lasts for a certain amount of time. You pay your premiums, and if you die during that period of time, your family gets money, but it's not an investment. It's not something that if I sue you, it's not an asset that you could use to satisfy that lawsuit in the way that whole life insurance is. So I think when Mark Tinsley says that, that's what he means. He did not have whole life insurance that would be an asset that he could attack as part of the lawsuit. Well, that is the timeline. We will talk. And we'll be coming back to this timeline a lot because, as we said, the timeline is really important. We're going to go back to specific parts of it and really hammer those parts. But for now, that's the end of the timeline. Next week, we're going to sort of back up. We're going to talk about the boat crash and the things that happened around that. We're going to talk about Stephen Smith some more and that mystery and everything that was going on there. We're going to talk about Gloria Satterfield, who was the Murdaugh's housekeeper. We're going to talk about what was going on there. And so with that background of some of the strange things that happened, then we'll move into the trial itself and really start to drill down into the trial, what we learned from the trial, and whether or not the prosecution has put on enough evidence to convict Alec Murdaugh or not. Really going to be interested to see when you guys hear this. Will the defense have finished? Will the jury have returned a verdict? Will we get a verdict? We could always have a hung jury and do this again. But that's why we were really enjoying doing this case and doing it sort of simulcasting with the trial. You guys have thoughts. You've been sharing them. We want to hear more of them. If you're not on the gallery, which is our Facebook page, go find it. Check it out. If you need the link, let me know. I'll be happy to provide it to you. Lots of great discussion on there. Great people on there. They really dig down into these issues. And if you enjoy talking about true crime, it is a great place to talk about it. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. Hello to those of you on Patreon getting these episodes early and ad-free. Hello to those of you on YouTube, especially those of you who've been doing the lives with us. We have been doing a lot of our legal briefs, which is our other podcast, live with our patrons, and then putting those live recordings up on YouTube. So I know a lot of y'all have been watching those, and I hope you've been enjoying them. And thank you to our patrons for joining us on those. It is so interesting to not only discuss the case, but also hear instantaneous feedback and be able to respond to that. Really edifying, and I think makes the episodes much better. So thank you guys for all that. Well, Alice, before we sign off, is there anything you want to add?
I'm glad we got through the timeline, Brett, because I really want to dive into all these unusual aspects. I know you've probably heard about them in the news, but this story is just truly stranger than fiction, and it's all true. So we'll see what there is, and please come back and join us for it next time. And time's ticking, Brett. We better start recording.
No, by then, who knows? We might have another prosecutee. We'll have to see. But one way or the other, we will see you guys next week, whether it's with a new baby or not.
I need more time.
But yeah, no, that's the thing. Every time when Alice and I sign off on these, or when I hang up with her, I'm always, stay pregnant, Alice. just a little bit longer. Just a little bit longer. Okay, well, we'll see you guys next week. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors.
Is that
I just thought it was interesting.
Is that a court filing that they did?
Yeah. So,
You have alibi filings? Or is that just part of their trial
in
brief?
South Carolina. No, it's a separate filing. I mean, it was a couple pages.
It's literally called an alibi filing?
Yeah. I mean, an alibi is an affirmative defense, so I assume they have to, lay out for the prosecution what the alibi is.
I guess I typically think about that just within a trial brief. But
well, I mean, who knows if they have trial briefs in South Carolina? You know how it is. Every state's different.
True story. Okay.
True story.
Ready in time.
It's the beauty of America.
I'm gonna finish this chocolate in my mouth and Ready to go. Ready to go.
All month long on Pluto TV, stream the biggest Tyler Perry movies free. Watch your favorites like Medea's Witness Protection and Medea's Big Happy Family. Join Tyler Perry as he goes on a couples retreat with Sharon Leal in Why Did I Get Married? Or Idris Elba and Gabrielle Union in the Tyler Perry directed film Daddy's Little Girls. Plus, Pluto TV has hundreds of channels with thousands more movies and TV shows. Available on live and on demand. Download the free Pluto TV app on all your favorite devices and start streaming now. Pluto TV. Drop in, watch free.